All right, this is the beginning study on the book of Daniel. I'm going to go through a pretty exhaustive introduction to understanding the book in its general terms. One of the reasons why is because I don't think that we grasp the enormity of what Daniel was not. Daniel was never declared a prophet, yet he was probably the most prolific, important prophet ever in Scripture, simply because of the fact that much of what we know as the futurist doctrine that's out there comes directly from the latter part of the book of Daniel in regards to explanation of the end times, if you will. The book of Daniel falls into two specific groups. One, the first 6 chapters relate to historical events in Babylon, spanning the years of the Jewish nation's exile from 605 BC to 537 BC. Now, what's interesting about that is that there is an extensive amount of information that is actually out there. In 1899, they started to excavate the ruins of what we know now as Babylon. I'm going to give you some statistics, and I'm going to try to get you to grasp the enormity of what I'm talking about, because I want to tell you, I did not even realize to the degree of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, what it looked like. I have some pictures. They're renderings, if you will, in color. We're going to explain a little bit of that so that you can kind of get an idea, simply because of the fact that, again, of the enormity of it. The palace, historians say that this building, this palace, was the most exquisite, the most beautiful, the most unique the world has ever known, ever. Ever. In other words, there's nothing that's been built that would surpass this. Now, the first 6 chapters of Daniel talks about 3 friends, a guy named Shadrach, Meshach, and I say to bed we go, but anyway. The remaining chapters are written in the first-person record from the visions of the future events given to Daniel in his old age. Daniel was about 15 when he was taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar himself. He came and laid siege on Judea and Jerusalem and took a large portion of that group of people back to Babylon with him. Now, 2 languages are used in chapters 2 through 7. Were written in Aramaic. The rest was written in Hebrew, which is very interesting because why was it not written in Babylon, the Babylonian tongue? It was because Daniel stayed true to his religion. Even though at 15 he was a devout, very devout Jew. And it's very interesting that he would not compromise under any circumstances. In fact, fascinating as that sounds, is that he did some things that are pretty wild, because we're going to read about him tonight. Some of the Sunday school stories that everyone has heard, but maybe you didn't realize to what extent actually took place, especially in regards to what it looked like. Now, no one knows the reason for this, but why they were in 2 languages, but this is what might be expected in a book written for Jews living among Babylonians. Now, Daniel, as a youth, found 15 years old. Daniel was taken to Babylon along with his friends into captivity in 605 BC. Daniel found favor with those in authority during his lifetime, occupied high office of the Babylonian and the Persian empires. He actually lived through 4 sets of kings. And the last king, Darius, who threw him in the lion's den, that guy wasn't even supposed to be king. Cyrus was. He was ruling in place of Cyrus at the time. Fascinating stuff. He and his friends were prime youth, good-looking, natural athletes, natural abilities, and were selected for special training. But as young as they were, Daniel and his friends were determined not to compromise their religious beliefs. Now, this is where it gets interesting. And I don't know about you, but if you can comprehend this, this is just hard to believe. The city of Babylon, where Daniel's ministry happened, was one of the 7 wonders of the world. Show me the picture of Babylon. This is a very interesting picture in regards to its incredible. Now, if you can imagine, I can't overstate it. This, they believe, was actually very near to where the Garden of Eden was. Also, there are pictures, and it shows them, one of them is done in, I think, in the 1930s, that shows the remainder of the Tower of Babel within eyeshot of what we see now as these ruins. If you could look and see the moat that is there, that was 150 yards wide, split the river Euphrates in half, and it went completely around this city, completely around it. So crazy was this place that the Hanging Gardens that are talked about by many historians, unbelievable. In fact, let's go to that one. I want to show them that. This is what was in that city. The water was pumped about 150 feet into the air to water these gardens. Now, if you're familiar with Syria and that area, it gets to be 120 degrees during the day. But these were so lush, and if you can see it's hard to believe, but all of these arches that are underneath the aqueduct and all of the waterways and all of that were actually apartments, places where you, as a member of the Babylonian Empire, could, and you were hierarchy, that's where you got to go and just kind of hang out. They're like B&Bs. It was nuts. I mean, it's just crazy stuff that you see. And the thing that's interesting about this is, and this is hard to even grasp, the wall of the city was 70 feet wide, went 35 feet down into the ground so that they could not tunnel into the city, and you could ride a chariot. And on the top of it, there was 120 or 180 different shacks which housed soldiers all the way around the city. The wall was 65 miles one way, 65 miles across, and spanned and made a complete encompass of the city itself. Now, what's fascinating about that is that even Alexander the Great visited this city. And what's even more interesting about that, it was considered impregnable. No one could defeat them. Think about that, back in that time. Now, if you can imagine being in, how many know about how thick the walls are in their house? Well, about so big, right? That's about it. The walls to the palace, just the palace, we would be in the middle of the wall if you went from the front of the church to the back of the church. That were the walls. 50 to 60 feet thick. Some of them ranging were 75 feet tall. This place was amazing. Show us Ishtar, the entrance to Ishtar. If you can imagine a city that looked like this, everything about it was pristine. These lions were about 16 feet tall, solid gold. Everything that you see on the walls are all inlaid ceramic tiles of one kind or another. Most of them were covered with or lined with gold. And it wasn't gold like we know. We have gold, for your ring or whatever. It was a different kind of gold. It was actually, I guess you could call it dirty gold, where it is not as pure as it could be, but it was made in a way that they could fashion it. And it's just fascinating to me. The size of this monument, if you will, this place, is so large that they started in 1899. I think it was 1932. They're still discovering stuff there. There's so much. It's just amazing. And what's even more interesting about Daniel and his life, especially when it comes to this kind of majestic beauty, is that Nebuchadnezzar never stopped building. he kept building. He was building the whole time. When Daniel came on the scene and became overlord, if you will, of all of the Chaldeans. Chaldeans were the soothsayers and they're wise people. And most of them were kind of dumb, but I'm just saying they were wise. And fascinating stuff was going on. He was still building, still expanding his palace. This was the largest palace. He had a second palace that he was building, and there was a third. And he just began that one. So it's hard to believe when you start to think about what was going on at this time in history, that if Nebuchadnezzar was coming, you left town because his army was undefeatable. Tremendous amount of things. And he ruled for 45 years, his reign. And of that, and then his another Nebuchadnezzar, believe it or not, came on scene. He started to build another temple, another one. But he was a very religious man. And I say religious only in the fact that there was, let me see if I can give you some kind of, the ancient historians said that the wall was 60 miles around, okay? 15 miles on each side, 300 feet high, 300 feet high. Think about that, 300 feet high. The top of the church here is 60, not quite 60 feet to the peak. Think about it, 5 times taller than that. 80 feet thick, extending 15 feet into the ground, 35 feet into the ground, so the enemies couldn't tunnel in. The wall was built of bricks, 1 foot square, 3 to 4 inches in height. There was a quarter mile of clear space between the city wall and all the way around, so they could see if anyone was coming. The wall was protected by wide and deep moats filled with water, as you can see. There were 250 towers on the wall and guard rooms for soldiers with 100 gates of solid brass. The city was divided by the Euphrates into 2 almost equal parts. Both banks were guarded by brick walls with 25 gates connecting streets, ferry boats that travel back and forth over the river. It's hard to believe. As the Hanging Gardens, as I was just giving you an example, the Hanging Gardens to me is kind of hard to fathom. They were, if you can believe this, plateaus, as you can see them up there, 150 yards square, 400 feet square. There was dozens of them, supported by a archway and water being pumped from the Euphrates almost 200 feet in the air. All of this going on in 605 BC. Think about that. And you think there's nothing new under the sun, just saying. Now, the apartments that they're talking about, and Daniel was the chief governor of the wise men of Babylon, and it still remained a very important city. Now, Daniel was a witness of the palace, and he was there basically from 606 to 534, 72 years. At 15, and he stayed there for 72 years. So he was 87 at the time when we see what was going on in the last chapters. Now, I don't want to jump into anything, but I think we're going to let's go to the scripture, and let's talk a little bit about what Daniel was all about. And Daniel, taken to Babylon, in chapter 1, gives an explanation of what took place in Daniel's life. The 3rd year of the reign of Joachim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, and some of the vessels of the house of God. He brought them to the land of Shinar. We heard that term. If you read your Bible at all, Shinar is a very, very famous place. And we know all about it because we know that it's a real place. Again, this is not a story, because a lot of people didn't think that Daniel, the book of Daniel, should have been canon, because there was no validity to his prophetic prowess. But what's interesting about that, Jesus himself speaks of Daniel in chapter 24, I believe it is, or 23 of Matthew, where he vindicates Daniel's prophecy. It actually talks about it. Now, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, to his hand and some of the vessels of the house of God, and brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, very interesting guy's name, his chief eunuch, hate to be him, to bring some of the people of Israel, both royal family and nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding and learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food of the king ate and the wine that he drank. And they were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel called Belshazzar, Hananiah called Shadrach, Mishael called Meshach, and Azariah called Abednego, or Tebednego. That's how I always remember it. Interestingly enough, this is something probably we didn't know. Daniel was related to the king. All of these guys were nobles. All of these guys were royalty, believe it or not. Daniel's faithfulness. Now, it takes us to, in verse 8, Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king will assign you food for your drink, and for what? Why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, he said to the chief of the eunuchs, and assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days, and let it be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. And then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths that eat the king's food that to be observed to you, and deal with your servant according to what you see. So he listened to them on the matter. And everybody's always asked the question, why did they do this? Were they vegetarians? No. Had everything to do with where the food came from. It came from idol worship. And they would not defile themselves with idol worship food. You know, it didn't matter how good it was, didn't matter where it came from. I'm not going to do that because my religion tells me I cannot do that. And so he tested them on that. Now, and in the end of 10 days, they were in better appearance and fatter in flesh. I don't know about you, but if I did vegetables for 10 days, I don't think I'd be that way. But anyway, in flesh and all the youths that ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and their wine and drank and gave them vegetables. And for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel and the understanding in all visions and dreams. Now remember what they're teaching them. If you a study of history and understand the Babylonian theology, the Chaldean theology is everything that there is dark. Everything. From channeling to the New Age theology of rocks and all kinds of other stuff like that, and all of the other different idols that were out there, they worshiped them all. How do we know that? Because there were like 580 different temples. It's just amazing. But Nebuchadnezzar believed that the origin, or Marduk, the name of their god, was the origin of all life. So something had to happen here. There had to be something to change. Now, at the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among them all was none found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, or Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better. This is cool, because we see in Leviticus, we see in the Proverbs talking about what happens when you honor God. God returns to you 10 times. It's fascinating. All the magicians and enchanters in all of his kingdom, and Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. Now, Cyrus, the first year of Cyrus, is what I was talking about. When we talk about everything that took place in Daniel's life, Cyrus is the last king that was involved with him. Then we have a trouble. Then we have a problem. There's a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, enchanters, and sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever, tell your servants to dream, and we'll show you the interpretation. King's not stupid. This guy's a sharp guy. He's the guy that designed this city. I mean, just think about it. This guy's not dumb. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream of this interpretation, you shall be torn from limb to limb. In other words, you tell me the answer, I'm going to tell you the story. And your houses shall be laid to ruins. But if you show me the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and rewards of great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. Answered the second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dreams, and we'll show its interpretation. King answered, said, no, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there will be one sentence for you. This is fascinating, because it wasn't just these guys that were standing in front of him. It was going to be everybody. Everybody was going to die. You've agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I'll know that you can show me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, I love this part. Think about this. They back him into a corner. Now they're going to put Daniel on the spot. Because, listen to what they say. Men can't do this. Listen to what they say. There's not a man on earth who can meet the king's demands, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Because of this, the king was angry, very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed. And they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men. I don't know about you. I think I'd come up with a plan too, just saying. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Did he have it yet? Did Daniel have it yet? No. Did he have any idea what was going on? No. But he trusted God, and he moved with what God said, and he knew that God would reveal it to him. Look what it says. God reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream, verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Ezra, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, his companions, and he told them to seek mercy from God of the heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions may not be destroyed, and the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in the vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness and the light that dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and that have now made known to me what is asked of you, and for you have made known to us the king's matter. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, told the king and appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon, And he went and said to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. I don't know about you, but that takes a lot of guts. I'm sorry. Then Arioch brought Daniel before the king in haste, because he was supposed to be killing people and bringing their heads to the palace, and he hadn't done it yet. So he goes and gets them. And so, do not destroy the wise men. So it says, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king's interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, are you able to make known me the dream that I've seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king and said, no, I love this because he gives all the glory to God. No wise men, enchanters, magicians, astrologers can show the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar that will be later days, what their later days will look like. And he says, your dream and the visions of your head as you lay on your bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed came thoughts that would be after this, and he who reveals the mysteries made known to you what it's to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. This is where a lot of people get the idea and the theology that goes on about the interpretation of dreams. This is where tons of it comes from. I don't know how many of you have ever seen books in the bookstore just talking about interpreting your dreams. There is a dark side to this, and there is a light side to this. When you try to do it on the dark side, it's guess. When you do it on the light side, it's God's direction, and it's visions, not dreams. There's a difference. Visions come to those that seek God. Dreams come in a whole lot of different ways, and it can become masked and all kinds of stuff. So you have to be really careful when you deal with this. But now I love this part because this matches up with history in regards to what Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar. Now you got to remember, he's only in his second year of his kingship, if you will. He's a little panicked. He's building this huge place. All this is going on all around him. He's disturbed by this dream. And he serves a different God. Think about that. You saw, O king, and behold great images. Its image, mighty and exceeding brightness, stood before you. And its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was fine gold, its chest, its arms of silver, the middle and the thighs of bronze, and legs of iron, his feet partly iron and partly clay. As you looked, the stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron and the clay and the bronze and the silver and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now I will tell you its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, in whom the God of heaven has given you the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, in whose hands he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, the birds of heaven, are making you rule over them all, and you are that head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall rise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, and they shall rule over the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because the iron breaks into pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush these things. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes and the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, and they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings of the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Think about this. He's telling his future. This is what's going to happen to you. and never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to other people. It shall break in pieces, and these kingdoms shall be then to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw, as a stone was cut from the mountain by no human hand, that it broke into pieces of iron and bronze of clay, silver and gold. A great God has made known to the king what it shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. King Nebuchadnezzar did what? Look what he did. Fell on his face and paid homage to Daniel. They commanded that the offering and incense to be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, truly your God is the God of every God. This is where the friendship between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar became so amazing. Now, all of that being said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, the revealer of mysteries, and for you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, the chief prefect over the wise men of Babylon. He's a big dude. This is a big deal. Daniel made the request of the king that he appointed, of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three guys, over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained in the king's court. Now, let me tell you something about power. Ultimate power ultimately corrupts. And the people around you that are in cahoots with you or doing what you do want to manipulate that power. Nebuchadnezzar is no different. He's a smart dude. I mean, he was smart. He was the one that put together everything that they saw, all of the things that were happening. But he was tricked by his own power. Just like what we see happening today. We see this in our own government. People who have power do not like to give up their power. And they'll do anything to keep it. They will lie, they will cheat, they will do all kinds of stuff. So what happened to Nebuchadnezzar next is pretty fascinating, actually. Because, think about it. Look what he says here. Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold because Daniel told him he was going to what? He was that image of gold, right? Okay? Look at what it says now. Whose height was 60 cubits, its breadth 60 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and I hate this one thing. He basically he brought in the band, he brought in the party people, and he's put together this thing, and this is what we're going to do every day. Every time that you hear this music, you're going to bow and you're going to worship me. That's what he said. And he thought it sounded pretty cool. Until. Now, remember, there's some time involved here that we need to see. There's some time that's taken place, maybe a couple of years. Everything's going good, everything's terrific. All of a sudden, he's full of himself. Like many people who are in complete control. They get full of themselves. And he says, well, this would be a good idea. Let me see if we can do this. So as we read down, we see this. You are commanded, O people and nations and languages, this is verse 4, that you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, and blah, 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 blah. And he says, when the party's going on, everybody's going to worship. And they're going to worship me. This is how it works. He says, but if you don't, you'll be thrown into the fiery furnace. Now, let me preface this for just a second as you get this idea. There is nothing in Babylon that ain't big. It's like going to Texas. Everything in Texas is big, right? I mean, that's what they keep telling me. My point that I'm making is that he's got the hanging gardens, he's got the 70, 75, 80-foot thick, 330-mile wall, you can't get in, and all kinds of army, everybody's cool, everything's big. Can you imagine what this furnace was like? Can you imagine what this furnace was like? So to scare everybody to worship, he said, if you don't fall down, blah, blah, blah. So what happens? Therefore, because the Chaldeans who now had Daniel over them, I'm telling you, man, if you can't see the correlation between what's going on in America today, or any place where there's trying to take over and become dominant and dictatorial and fascist, if you will, because let me tell you, in a monarchy, he's it. He says you die, you're done. They'll go out and skin you and bring you back and barbecue if that's what you want. It's going to be done. But look what he says here. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Is that not happening right now? Come on. They declare, I just heard something today that I couldn't believe. I couldn't believe it. That this crazy reporter was talking to Netanyahu and accusing him of genocide. I'm going, oh, okay. What they did was fine. They wouldn't answer that. My point that I'm making is that this is not how it works. But look what he says. The Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared that King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever, of course. You, O king, made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, blah, 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 and whoever does not do that, they need to go into the fiery furnace. There are certain Jews in whom you've appointed over the affairs of who? Us and everybody else. And, I mean, if you can't, it's just so hard to imagine. First of all, it's hard to imagine that these 4 little Jewish boys that came over from nowhere that were captured, they're slaves, are ruling over everyone. That was amazing in itself. But here it goes. There are certain Jewish boys that have appointed the affairs of the promise of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. And Nebuchadnezzar was furious with rage because he was all caught up in himself. Does it sound familiar? It sounds very familiar. So Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is this true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you don't serve the gods and worship the golden images I've set up? And if you are ready to hear the sound of the horn and the pipe, and you don't do that, I'm afraid you're going to get a sunburn. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said, O King Nebuchadnezzar, I have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, the God of whom we serve, listen to this, this is so powerful. The God in whom we serve will deliver us from the burning, fiery furnace. He will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods. We will not worship the golden image that you've set up. And he was filled with fury. But how does God deal with incarceration? How does God deal with our misery? How does God deal with injustice? So he said, off to the fiery furnace, he said, and he ordered some of the mighty men of his army, bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. These men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments. Now, they're setting the scene. They've got 5 layers of clothes on. I don't know if it's cold there, or I'm just saying. They got 5 layers of clothes on. Look what's cool. Next thing we find out, the 3 men, Shadrach, they bound them, and then they overheated the furnace until it was cherry red to make sure they would burn. Please. They walk them down there. The 2 guys that take them down there die, and they shove them into the fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar was what? 24. Astonished, and rose up in haste as he declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men into the flames? That's true, O king. I see 4, and I see them unbound, and I see them walking in the midst of the fire. I love the next part. And they're not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door. I love this part. How near, I don't know. Maybe yelling. I don't think he got too close. My point that I'm making is this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, came out and come here. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And all of the other guys that caused all of the problems, Jiminy Christmas, what do you think happened to them? What I like about it, the hair on their head was not singed, their clothes did not smell like smoke, and there was nothing. And so what did Nebuchadnezzar do? He answered and says, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." And he sent his angel to deliver his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather to serve and worship any god except their own God. And therefore I make a decree. I love this. Kings can do this. Once you get caught in your stuff, you can't get rid of them, but they can make a decree. What is that decree? Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb to limb, which seems to be a narrative that he likes, and their houses shall be laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now, if that doesn't blow your mind, nothing does. So what do we know about what's taking place here? There's three takeaways that we need to basically kind of wrap our head around. The first takeaway is that even when things aren't going your way, if you do what God tells you to do, he will have your back. If you think that things are going to go sour, you take on the responsibility of saying, "No, I'll serve my God the way I'm supposed to serve God." And what does he say? "I will show up and I will set you free." And this is exactly what happened. I just still find this probably one of the most dramatic instances in this particular piece of the fiery furnace, that when people want to take you and cause you pain, and if you're doing the right thing according to what God says, you will always come out on top. Every time. Doesn't matter what it is. And I find this whole thing in particularly fascinating. It's just a fascinating story. And the more I understand of the desire for all of us, the desire for us to do the right thing, and then listen to the crowd tell us to not do that and give in, is when we get in trouble. When we do the right thing, stand up for what's right, God will always show up. Always. Doesn't matter what it is. Nebuchadnezzar begins to praise God. All of a sudden, Nebuchadnezzar has a whole different outlook on life, especially what's coming next for this guy. This guy's got some real challenges. 45 years, I can't even imagine. I must have been like about every couple of weeks he had to get a Daniel pump up. You know what I mean? He'd say, "Hey, Daniel, come and talk to me. Tell me what's going on." And that pump up, because it was really easy to move into the old way instead of staying in the new way. And that's how I see that. And I see that in a lot of different ways. A lot of people want to take this time frame that he was talking about, especially this first dream that he had, the dream that he was talking about. That is actually, if you put this in a timeline, you can see where this is, and it ends up with Alexander the Great and the Persian breach from Attila the Hun. And that part, he said, someone who is, what did he say? Iron and clay, soft, but not completely whole. They won't mix together, because that was at the time, Cyrus, at the end of Cyrus's reign, all of that started to take place. And of course, who cut loose all of the people out of Babylon? It was Cyrus. At the 70th year, it's exactly as prophecy said, cut them loose and said, "Go back to your house. Go back to Jerusalem. Go build the temple. We don't want you here anymore. Go on. If you need anything, let me know. I'll get you. We got all this stuff and I'll put away in the treasury. We'll just give it to you. Just take it and go. Just go." And it's fascinating how God does that. So any questions, any thoughts? I'm just lecturing right now because these stories are pretty, how can I say it? You can't really improve much on them other than the fact that I can give you some more facts. When we get into the second portion, when we start talking about times and a half, and all of that, that will get incredibly interesting. It is not easy to follow, but it is not difficult to follow. So I want to share that with you. Any thoughts? Anybody got a question? Nobody care? Serious? Say. No? Oh, I'm satisfied with that. Yeah. Chapter 4 next week. Well, 4, 5, and probably 6, I'm thinking. You've got it through 5 right now, right? Sorry? Oh, don't know where we're at. Anyway. The second dream. Oh, I can't wait to get to that one. I can't wait to get to meaning particle. That one's great. And then Nebuchadnezzar got a little bit too big for his britches and ends up eating grass for a few months. I don't know about you. I'm not a big fan. They used to do that across the street at the coffee shop. They used to make blendeds out of grass. They cut the grass and they put it in. Yeah, I'm not a big fan. Not my big, So, any other questions, thoughts? Yes, Bill. Sure. You're talking about people who consider themselves prophets and they are speaking about that. Yes, go ahead.
Well, and I would consider that, although I haven't specifically heard them refer to this, but I can see how in their own mind that they're thinking like, well, just like God protected the 3 gentlemen in the fire,
Yeah, all right.
He will protect me, and I'm going to, and they're very earnest, they're very sincere in what they're doing. They really,
Mm-hmm.
well, at least they appear to be out on it, not. But I'm just wondering, this is always the conundrum is sometimes you get very good instructions, but then they're interpreted by very manipulative people. I'm
Boy.
just wondering if you could comment on that a little bit.
Comment on
How people will take
how people can become so ignorant about the very things that they try to espouse, basically. Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Daniel's such a great example of that because of the fact that Daniel never said that he was a prophet. He never said that. But he did say that he would interpret dreams or visions or whatever the case may be. But it was only when God prompted him to do that or there was a need. Now, and every one of these matters that we're going to be talking about, especially when it comes to Daniel in the historical side, the first 7 chapters, he makes it very clear that he's being drawn into a situation that he cannot change. What you're talking about in regards to, and the question's brought out about the fact that there are people that go around considering themselves prophets. They'll even give you a card. Hi, my name is Prophet so-and-so. Well, I believe that the first time somebody gives you a card that says, I'm Prophet so-and-so, they're probably not. And the only reason why I say that, if they have to promote themselves, I find it hard to believe. Daniel didn't have to get promoted. He's our example. Daniel didn't have to get promoted. He didn't have to be told, he didn't have to come and says, oh yeah, king, I'm a prophet. I'm going to tell you all about that. He looked at him and he just said, well, there's nobody on the planet that can do this. There's nobody that I know that can do this. But there is a God in heaven that I do know. He can do that. Let's see what he says. Now, that's different than, hi, let's call down the fire from heaven. Well, I've never seen that done, and I've seen some pretty amazing stuff happen. I mean, I've seen some really amazing things happen. But my point is that, to your point, is that I think the prophetic word has been abused. I think that it's been exploited for money. And I think that that is totally against the Word of God in every way, shape, or form, because it says that the gospel is not for sale. The pastor that I grew up under, he wouldn't even let a card table come out here with tapes of people's stuff, or even if it's a singing group. He wouldn't even do that. If you want to do it out in the foyer, that's fine, but you're not doing it in here, because he had principles. And the principles, in my point of view, and how you're and what you're saying, I totally get. I don't know whether you can take the showmanship out of it. And the reason why I say that is that then what you're ending up doing is the illusion, the preconceived idea of what you think you're going to receive. And then and that whole theology is dangerous, because it cheapens the church. It cheapens the office. But what I do believe very strongly, that there is a difference between the two, what you're talking about in prophetic word and deliverance. They're two different things. What a lot of people don't understand in that concept is that a prophetic person, someone who is really truly prophetic, they don't have to show me a card. Something between your heart and their heart all of a sudden gels. And you know that they're telling the truth. Or to the point where they speak to you and they say something to you that nobody else knew, not even your wife, not even whoever, and they tell you the truth, and you know in your heart that that's the truth. You know they're talking. It ain't them talking to them. It's God talking through them to you. That I believe in. I see that. But then we have to take, what my takeaway from this is this, and I want to speak to this in a really specific way. There are people that I know, genuine people that know what deliverance is. Now, when I say deliverance, is that when you are tormented by a dark power, I don't care what it is. I mean, there's only one dark power, but there's many forms of that dark power that come against you in ways that are, even a spirit of narcissism, to me, is a dark thing. Because somebody who promotes themselves all the time, as far as I'm concerned, they're lost. And they got to get their act together. But there are people that I know, I'm operating on every now and then. I'm going to get real personal here because I think it's important. Why I'm sharing this, I don't really know, but I'm going to share it anyway. That you just know that there's something going on. There's a person that I know, a lady that I know that is incredible. She can see things I've never seen before. She said, did you see that running around behind the eyes of that person in the white part of their eyes? And I'm going, no. And she would be able to go right to that person, go right directly to that, expose it, because that's what happens when you expose it to the light. That entity, that oppression, that thing, all of a sudden gets really freaked out, and they'll either manifest, the person, or the situation will change, or they'll start doing something, or they'll want to run. I mean, literally, leave, like take off. The difference between a prophet and someone who is in deliverance ministry, or at least has that mentality, if they're truly who they say they are, they're not going to advertise it. Because the Spirit of God will bring people to them, and then they'll have no place to go. They're like in the OK Corral, baby. They've got both guns ready to go, and they're sitting there going, why am I here? And I've seen that happen where that is. Now, and I can only speak. Wednesday I talked about this a little bit. I was talking about the gifts and what they look like in deliverance especially. In my case, I was manifesting, this is what's manifesting in my life, there was a darkness that would come over me that would be, I don't know how to explain it other than the fact it was just like darkness. I would get incredibly deep migraine headaches where the lights like these would make me go crazy and the headache would just pound. Am I right, dear? And I'd get in the bed and I would go down into the corner of the bed and I'd pull the covers and the blankets and everything and pillows over my head to try to get away from the light and the sound. And I could not do it. I just could not do it. I was in Yuba City at a friend of mine's church. They were having a deliverance conference. It was a conference. I was just going to get training. And they were having a deliverance conference. And I was there, and I was in the, I can see it in my eye right now. I can see it in my mind. I was on the third row back from the stage. I don't even remember who was talking. Oh, yeah, I do. The gentleman that was there from Canada. And he came to me after one of the meetings and he said, I know that you're in pain. And I just looked at him and I said, I'm not in pain. He goes, you're in pain. He says, I'm telling you, you're in pain. And I looked at him and I said, no, I'm not. Later, he says, trust me. And I said, okay. I'm at the third row. I'm the light from the stage and the sound and the music and everything else. I had this horrible headache, horrible migraine. I had to close my eyes and I put my head on the pew and I had a vision. This vision came to me and what I saw was myself elevated above a cloud looking down, and there was these pinpoints of light coming up, just a little tiny ones, dark cloud, pinpoints of light. I gravitated to one of these lights, just like I was floating, and I went down and followed it all the way down to the pulpit. It was me speaking in Bella Vista on someday, I don't know what it was. And he said, and in my head, he said, that's you. And he said, you can't keep doing what you're doing because you need to get that gone. And what I was dealing with was depression. I was dealing with a darkness. I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know where it was coming from, and finally. And then as I'm sitting there, I see myself in the pew with my head down. And I see a hand come down. It's coming down out of the clouds. And then I turn, and as I look, I see these talons of a black bird, like a hawk, buried in my forehead, literally buried, like halfway down. A little trickle of blood coming from each one of them. And I'm just, the pain of this thing was just amazing. It was just over the top. And as I was there, this hand came down over my shoulder. And I saw it from here, and I saw the hand pulling these talons out of my head. And every one of them had a name. Disappointment, failure, all these horrible things come to my mind. And as I saw them come out, it's like the last one was pulled out of my temple, over here on this side. My headache went away, just like disappeared. It was bizarre. And then I stopped and I opened my eyes and I turned to look to see what it was, who it was. I wanted to see who it was. I didn't have to turn any further than here because when I looked, I saw the hole in his hand. And I knew who it was. And I knew I was free. And since then, I have never had anything like that ever happen to me before. And he said, he basically told me, he says, and you can do the same thing that I just did. He said, because I'm with you. You've experienced it. And I went, whoa. It was so cool. And to be honest with you, people look at me like I'm crazy when I tell them, I said, you can be free of that. They look at me and they go, huh? No, you can be free of that. Believe me, you can be free of that because I've experienced it. Now, what am I saying? Getting back to your thought. Prophecy. I have a real challenge with what I see. Totally. Across the board. Doesn't matter who it is. Deliverance, I'm a little bit more skeptical. Because there are people out there that know exactly what needs to be done at that moment to see people set free. And I think that's what Jesus did the whole time through the New Testament. He went to people who were bound and set them free. He didn't mess around and talk about it. He said, well, let's go to the 12-step chart. No, he said, no more. You're done. Out of here. And it was over. To me, that's what it's all about. That's me. Prophetic stuff, that's kind of scary because you can get caught up in the stuff and put yourself in a position that would ruin a person's life if you said the wrong thing. You can't go wrong with when somebody walks away I've seen it right here at this altar. Jimmy Herberson sat down here, hit 10 years, heroin addict. We need pinpoints when he came to church. He came to church because I kept calling him. I said, come to church with me. He come in his suit, swear to God, and a white shirt, and he came down the altar, and I'm not kidding you, I watched his little pinpointed eyes go to full size. I just watched it, and I knew God had showed up. And 3 or 4 weeks later, he was back doing the same thing again because he wouldn't get out of where he was at, and he was warned. I'm just saying, God's good all the time. And God can continue to do that. These guys know what it was all about. And they didn't have to prove nothing. They just lived their life the way they should. And that's where we're at. That's where we all should be doing. Living our lives just the right way. And I believe that's what God has intended for all of us. Amen? And believe it or not, we're done. Amen. Any other questions? I'm sorry if we're good. Thank you.